Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Bon matin.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Order, please. It is 8:18. I'd like now to call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 136 of the Standing Industry and Technology Committee of the House of Commons. Before beginning, I'd like to ask all of you to consult your cards concerning the guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents in terms of using the microphones and your earpieces to ensure safety and security for interpreters. And consistent with our order from Monday, April 24, 2023, we are resuming consideration of Bill C-27, an act to enact the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act, and the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, and to make consequential and related amendments to other acts. I'd like to welcome our witnesses again, who have not been very much solicited up to now, and I don't have great hopes for today either. But with us, we have Samir Chabra, Director General, Marketplace Framework Policy Branch, with Runa Angus, Senior Director, Strategy and Innovation Policy Sector. We'll continue consideration of Bill C-27, but I recognize Mr. Perkins.
I've asked the committee to resume discussion on my motion where we left off last time on SDTC and the contribution agreements.
Yes, so you've moved your motion again, and so we're back to, pardon me, Mr. Madam. Okay, so considering we were on C-27 and Mr. Perkins is moving to an order, sorry, just one second. Okay, so yeah, sorry about that. So Mr. Perkins is moving that we resume the debate where we left it last meeting on his motion regarding regarding SDTC, and so if we are to resume the debate where we left it, we would need usually a vote unless I have consent around the table to get back to where we left off. I think I see consent around the table. And on that note, Mr. Patzer.
Sorry, Chair, I just had a quick question because this is just a procedural one. From what I understand, the last meeting was suspended, correct? And that would mean that we hit resume where we left off?
Last meeting was adjourned.
Well, it was adjourned. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
No worries. So are there, yes, Mr. Turnbull.
So maybe I could just ask for clarification, just to jump back in and resume the debate on this. Where were we at? I just asked because I know there was some amendments, etc., and there was quite a discussion. There was an amendment that didn't pass, and then I think we were on either another amendment or we were on the main motion. I can't remember which. But could we just have a refresher as to where we're at, Chair?
That is actually a very good question, Mr. Turnbull. I was hoping you would give us an answer, but I'll just check with I will just check with the clerk to make sure that we're on the same page, and so just give me 1 minute. Okay, so we were on Mr. Garon's amendment, which read. Oh, no, it's okay in English. Which added some aspects about redaction. So, Mr. Garon, if you have your amendment that you had suggested, that's what we were debating when we left off. Excusez-moi, Monsieur Garon. On débattait de votre amendement.
My apologies. We were debating your amendment when we adjourned the Monday's meeting. Would it be possible for you to reread the amendment that you had moved to refresh our memories? I would suggest that you read the motion with the amendment so we'll know what we're talking about. we had that therefore the committee order SDTC and ISED to produce copies of each contribution agreement signed between ISED and SDTC, signed since reinforced contribution agreement signed since June 4th, 2024, without redactions, excluding references to company names in both official languages. Within 14 days following the adoption of this motion, etc. So there were two components in the amendment. It was concluded between SDTC and ISED to ensure that these are contribution agreements, and then there was the redaction of references to the committee. Sorry for the interpreters. I know I started very quickly, and I hope I slowed down. And apologies to Ryan as well. Thank you, Mr. Garon. So this is the amendment that we were debating. Are there any comments, or should we vote on this amendment? Or is there consent? Mr. Turnbull.
Off the last meeting, if I remember correctly, now that I'm getting back to kind of where we were. So thank you for that, Mr. Guénon. It refreshed my memory. And I was saying I wasn't sure how comfortable I felt with that. I think I've since sort of reflected on this, and I'm feeling more comfortable with what Mr. Guénon had proposed. So I think on our side that we'll be prepared to support. So.
Okay, so there's support. Okay. So I see, sorry, I was talking to the clerk, but there's general support for the amendment. So we're back to the main motion as amended by Mr. Garon. Are there any comments? Nope. So we'll.
I'll just make a brief, if I could, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I guess I have to put it on. Just a brief comment, just so those who are watching know what we're doing here. It's just what's called a production of documents motion, which is to produce documents that have been referenced numerous times in our study of the on SDTC, the Green Slush Fund, and what the reference is to something called a contribution agreement. And the contribution agreement is referenced quite extensively in the Auditor General's report concerning the expenditure, in this instance, of $58 million that was outside, as the Auditor General put it, of the contribution agreements. And what those agreements are is they're an agreement between the Industry Department and SDTC on what they could spend taxpayer money on, the parameters of it. They're not public documents, but it's pretty hard to make a judgment on what's been going on. We've also had testimony in another committee from a whistleblower that the government has amended those contribution agreements since they've put a new governance board in place, and those changes should be made public, in my view, not only the original agreements, but the documents themselves or the changes themselves, to see what new governance roles and restrictions the Liberals have put in place in the expenditure of the $1 billion or so that that current foundation, because it hasn't been transferred yet to the NRC, has in place for spending that money.
Mr. Perkins.
Perkins.
Turnbull.
It's the hair.
Apologies.
It's the hair. We get confused.
It's early. Yeah, it's really early. Sure. We'll get you another coffee. You must be hallucinating. Look, I just wanted to say, look, I don't think we don't have any issue with the contribution agreement being reviewed by committee members. I question, sort of the objective of this as being a good use of our committee time, to be honest. I think members will review that contribution agreement and probably find and be satisfied, and quickly we can move beyond this. So, I know the Conservatives have, continued to study this on multiple committees. I think, our committee time, I believe, is really valuable. We had just agreed to a motion that schedules some of our time out and accommodates a lot of the interests and objectives and some of the priorities of the different parties, trying to be very fair and reasonable. And I think that we came to an agreement on that, and then this was the very next thing. So I'm just letting you know that I'm opposed to this because I question the objective and the motive behind it, and I think the Conservatives have made their points on the record very clear that they're interested in doing this to try and continue studying SDTC forevermore. I don't think that that's necessary. I think we've had enough investigations and reviews. The government has stepped up time and time again to get to the bottom of this. I think we have held people accountable. So I will just say that we're opposed to the motion as amended, but I don't think there's anything, like the contribution agreements are something that I'm sure that members will enjoy reviewing. It's go nuts.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair, in between, I've been filling in at public accounts and other committees where this has come up as well. Can you maybe in the midterm, not to give you work, but maybe check in with the Public Accounts Committee chair to see what they're kind of doing on this? I'm just concerned that continually duplicating industry's a huge file, and I'm really happy we're going to move to the credit card and then study and the other stuff too. So I just would prefer at some point to have the kind of, like I kind of have my understanding of what's going on there, but I'd rather have chair to chair at some point in time discuss this. And that's not unusual because I actually, when we were studying copyright at one point, I moved a motion to combine industry and another committee. Oh my goodness, it's going to come back to me later, but it doesn't matter. Together, we did a joint study. So I just wanted to kind of maybe have you kind of reach out to do that so that we know what we're getting into entirely without relying upon rumors.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Will do.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments on the motion as amended? Seeing that there are none, I would ask the clerk to put it to a vote.
Turnbull.
Against.
Mr. Arya.
No.
Mr. Badaway.
No.
Mr. Gahir.
Against.
Mr. Van Bynen. Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Monsieur Généreux.
Wait.
Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Garner.
Yes.
Monsieur Garot.
Oui.
Mr. Massey.
Wait.
So the motion is adopted. Thank you, colleagues. This would bring us back to C27 unless there is... Okay, so we're back to C27. We were at CPC 9. Proposed by, and we had left it to a sub-amendment by Mr. Perkins on CPC 9. So I'm looking at Mr. Perkins. Mr. Perkins.
Yeah. Well, I can do a quick reminder since it's been a little while since we did this amendment on CPC 9 is with regard to the powers of the Privacy Commissioner. In essence, we are not supporters of the tribunal. We think it's an added layer of bureaucracy that's ineffective in some ways, like the competition tribunal is. And so it essentially transfers the powers of the that's proposed in here from the tribunal to the Privacy Commissioner, which we believe will lead to a more robust examination of privacy breaches by the Privacy Commissioner than he has the ability to have more legal ramifications for what the Privacy Commissioner does, and the ability of proponents to go straight to court after that. I believe, if this were to go through, is that not the case, that the appeals from a Privacy Commissioner ruling would avail those who disagree with that ruling that are involved to go straight to court rather than going to the tribunal.
Just before I let the officials answer, Mr. Massey.
Wondering, maybe we could hear from Mr. Turnbull. Is this, like, I know we're committed to having the government come back with more of a nuanced position about this, and so I'm wondering whether we should consider suspending today at this point in time, or whether or not we work through these things. If they're all connected, I'd hate to continue to go in circles here and lose momentum where there seems to be some joint kind of agreement, well, there is, because we passed it unanimously, to hear back from the government on this. And from what I understand, these things are intertwined. So I'm just kind of, I know we all came in here early and everything, but we had a good result in the last moment. So I think I'm just wondering whether or not we're going to go through, because I know some of my concerns and amendments are also connected with the government might be reproposing some alterations. And so I'm wondering why we try to hash out the mythics as opposed to the facts at this point in time. So I just throw that out to the tables.
We can have that discussion. I'll see Mr. Perkins has something to say on that. And so, Mr. Perkins.
I don't disagree, because there have been discussions, and we are moving next week, I guess not Monday, but then next meeting week today onto the credit card study. But I'd hate to lose the opportunity to, since everyone's here and had a little breakfast, to then propose another motion then that's on notice. So thank you, Mr. Massey. I'll take the opportunity. I put this on notice last week. Given that the Government of Canada has invested upward of $50 billion towards the creation of an EV battery ecosystem in Canada, and has mandated that all automobile sales in Canada be zero emitting by, it says 2040 on my list, but it should be 2035 on what was submitted. And given that one Northvolt $7 billion EV battery plant in Montreal, Quebec, has delayed constructions for upward of a year while it undergoes a strategic review of its future operations, despite receiving $7.2 billion worth of taxpayer money, and two, Unicor's $2.7 billion EV factory component plant in Kingston, Ontario, has halted construction despite receiving $1 billion worth of taxpayer subsidies, and three, Ford's $1.8 billion EV expansion in Oakville, Ontario, has been scrapped and retooled to make gasoline pickups despite receiving $590 million worth of taxpayer subsidies. The committee therefore agreed to conduct a 4-meeting study beginning in the first week of November to review the feasibility of the government's EV strategy, given that significant amounts of taxpayer support amid a global slowdown in EV sales, and that the committee agreed to hear from witnesses submitted by members of the committee proportional to their representation in the House, and report its findings to the House, and request that the government table a comprehensive response to the report. So I put this on notice last week. As we've seen in the media over the last number of months, we've seen a number of the companies that are involved in this space scaling back their production of EVs, including plans in Canada. As I said, the strategic review in the motion, where Northvolt announced 1,600 layoffs in Sweden already because of their, and they're not proceeding with certain plant constructions in Sweden. Volkswagen has scaled back their plans for EV production and part production in Europe. Ford lost $1 billion on their EV sales last year and has scaled back theirs. But the only place where we seem to be continuing with this thing that consumers and the markets aren't buying is the places where we have a massive government subsidy. And in this case, when it comes to the Stellantis and EV plants and Volkswagen plants, what we have is 100% assembly subsidy from the taxpayer of Canada through 2029, as we know, and then that's 75% the year after, 50% the year after that, 25% the year after that. And so the result of all of that is that perhaps it's not surprising then that where these global companies are getting 100% taxpayer subsidies, they haven't changed some of their plans, but where they're not getting the 100% subsidies, such as the Northvolt on the production subsidies, they're scaling back. So the free market is saying that there isn't the capacity for this, but yet the government is plowing ahead with what appears to be a fairly failed strategy of industrial engineering and selection in picking a particular technology that the market is not accepting and trying to put Canadian taxpayers on the hook. And as a result, because there's almost over, if you bring the provincial money into it, over $50 billion committed to the basically the 3 or 4 plants here, that we have a study on it before the government starts doling out more taxpayer money on the production subsidy side of it and on the construction side of it. Well, we should get an update of where the construction is on all of these plants and whether or not at this stage it's a good thing to do. So I will leave it there for now. I'm sure others will have a few thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. So you've moved your motion. Thank you, too, for the short intermission on C27. You broke the ice this session, so it's appreciated. There's a motion on the table. I have MP Area. I have Brian Massey and Ryan Turnbull.
Maybe, Chair, before I speak, should the witness still be here?
I'll give it a few more minutes, see how this
Sure.
motion goes, and because I got scared by Mr. Perkins there with the intermission on C27,
Okay.
so we'll see how it goes, but we'll liberate the witnesses earlier if needs be.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the transformation to clean economy across the world has just begun. You know, it started a few years back, but in the bigger scheme of things, this is a multi-decade thing that is now started. There will be small hiccups, small changes, small adjustment, tactical adjustment, strategic adjustments, etc. That does affect. And Canada, we are at the right spot at the right time to make maximum use of this opportunity that is there and make us a global leader in all things from mines to mobility. We have started supporting exploration and development of critical minerals, which I have to say that the United States is fully supporting, not just by words, but by the United States Defense Department is actually investing in Canadian mining companies. The Pentagon is investing. So that is how important the critical minerals is. From there up to electrical vehicles. If you look back at the 20th century, that was the sort of era of automobiles, oil and automobiles, especially the cars and the trucks. Now we are moving from that to electric vehicles, and the government has rightly put money where its mouth is in trying to support this entire industry through our Mines to Mobility strategy. Northvolt is a big player in Europe, and what changes, small changes they are making in Europe, is not going to get affected, which they have clearly said. One, it is time for us to encourage as many global players as possible to come to Canada and set up their plants. We should not interfere in their day-to-day operations, in their short-term strategic objectives or the tactics they use. In fact, this particular move of the government has attracted and has resulted in Canada being the biggest, second or third biggest recipient of foreign direct investment in the OECD countries, including the highest per capita foreign direct investments in any of the G7 countries. So it is yielding results, and in addition to EV plants, in addition to the battery plants, in addition to the minerals, mining companies, we also need to focus on the processing of minerals, which is the sort of things I think this committee should look into and check where we are in that part of the chain from mines to mobility. We are being very active. We see a lot of projects in the critical minerals mining. In mining projects, we see a lot of battery plants. We see a lot of EV manufacturing plants. In that chain, we are not seeing many stories about the processing of these minerals here. I think if at all the committee has to look into this segment or this sector, it is that sweet spot that we have to focus our limited time, limited resources on. So I suggest that this, instead of this motion, I don't think this motion is relevant at this time. Anytime there's small changes in the corporate sector strategies, etc., we're going to see a lot of changes, a lot of positive things. Sometimes some of the actions we may feel that they are not exactly very positive, but we have to give due credit to the corporate sector to do what is best in their interest, in their business, and which does affect the overall benefit of this transformation to electrical vehicles and the transformation to clean economy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Area. And in the meantime, I consulted with the oppositions, and I think we can liberate the witnesses that we have with us today at this point. Thank you very much for your presence again this morning, and to our legislative clerks as well. Merci beaucoup. J'ai Brian Massey.
Thank you very much. I have Brian Massey, Ryan Turnbull, Hans Pathway, and Jean-Dominique Caron. Mr. Patzer. Mr. Massey.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Turnbull. It was about the officials.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, look, I want to make a few points on the record about this, and then hopefully we can, fairly deal with this fairly quickly. There's lots of things to say about this, but I think, there's some factual inaccuracies in the actual motion that concern me. One is, and I think Mr. Arya, my colleague, Chandra, made some really good comments about this. The green industrial revolution is not stopping because the Conservatives deny that climate change is a reality, or deny that, that there's any need for that industrial transition. It's kind of shocking to see how they can't see the global trends that are going on around the world, and that Canada is actually doing really well in terms of building out and attracting investment and competing in the North American market for the EV battery supply chain. The fact that we're #1 in the world when it comes to Bloomberg NEF rates Canada as #1 for the EV supply chain, which is fantastic. We've seen billions of dollars of investment that it would not have come into our market. And we also see this as a really large transition that's global. So companies are going to have some challenges along the way. They're going to, adjust their schedules. Some of that is I think, to be very expected. But the one factual inaccuracy that really strikes me here is that this motion, and I'm not sure who wrote it. I know Mr. Perkins moved it, but I don't know. Maybe he didn't have a chance to read this, read up on this. But the new numbers on ZEV sales in Canada show that there's a 30% increase quarter over quarter as of the last quarter. So there's 65,733 new EVs were registered in Canada in Q2 of 2024. Sales saw a rise and jump to 12.9% of market share, with Manitoba and Quebec actually leading the way. 30% increase quarter over quarter. So that's significant. It's still, we want that to continue to rise, and I think Canadians rightfully are showing interest in wanting to drive more EVs. Now, globally, there's other trends that we could cite, but mostly I think there's an acknowledgement that this movement to electric vehicles is happening, whether the Conservatives like it or not. And it's going to happen. The question is, will Canada be competitive in that space? Will Canada actually be able to leverage all of its strengths and natural resources to truly be a global player and to be a player in the North American market in the integrated supply chains that we have. Obviously, we know that the United States and the Inflation Reduction Act changed the conditions in terms of Canada being competitive. So the things that the Canadian government has done have made us competitive, have drawn in investment, and I think it's important to note that the other factual inaccuracy, it's very small, but Unicor is not Unicor, it's Umicore. The other thing that we've heard very quickly is Northvolt has said publicly that its Sweden restructuring doesn't impact the work here in Canada, and its production schedule and construction schedule hasn't been impacted. We also know that no federal funding, the minister has been clear about this, has actually gone to Northvolt yet. But the structure of these deals is done in such a way that a lot of the subsidy portion of it is related to production. It's related to sales of EVs. So if these companies don't follow through and they don't sell EVs, they don't get the subsidies that were promised. If the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't continue or somehow is repealed in the United States, that those production subsidies are no longer in place. So this makes Canada competitive with the United States. It makes Canada competitive globally, and it really is the reason that we've seen this amount of massive investment come in. So all that to just say, I think the motion is flawed in multiple ways. I think in terms of what our committee has said, that we all agreed on a schedule, which includes hearing from the minister, studying having 4 meetings on the credit card study, which Mr. Massey put forward, that we all agreed to, and then getting back to C27. And I think, if we have other considerations for studies, they should be after C27. And so I think this is just not the right time for this particular study. I also worry about, kind of putting the industry on trial here. They need to have the flexibility that they need, in order to manage their operations and make these very large investments. And if they need to slightly reschedule things, I think that's perfectly reasonable. So, I don't agree with this motion. I think that this is, it's deeply flawed in terms of how it's been written. So I'm not opposed to, I think there's a great story, to be honest, to tell about the auto industry in Canada and the supply chains that we're building here. The frame of this motion is not one that I can support. So I think we should, move past this and get on with our committee work. Thank you.
Merci, Mr. Turnbull. Monsieur Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is somewhat unfortunate, as once again we're seeing the Conservatives put politics before business and people versus really ensuring we move forward with what we're supposed to be doing up here in Ottawa, which is putting the business before politics. And with that, being a mechanism, being a partner with vision. The bottom line, Mr. Chair, is that Canada is the front door to a new and emerging market, and that being the EV sector. And we're doing that with partners, with relationships, and with vision. And vision comes from the private sector working with the resources they have available to them from all levels of government. In Niagara, we just announced a $1.6 billion investment from a company, a Japanese company, Asahi Kasei, who is going to be a major supply chain partner with Honda. That was just announced in Alliston. We're looking at about 1,500 jobs and a lot of residual benefits when it comes to assessment growth, when it comes to trades, when it comes to our workforce, and the list goes on. I don't want to get into that because I would be here for an hour and a half talking about those benefits. But also I want to make mention that there's a reason why in Ontario, for example, 94% of all manufacturing jobs in Canada are contained within that province. Quite frankly, in comparison to all 50 states combined, Ontario is performing well because of this vision, because of these investments. And once again, it's an all-hands-on-deck approach with all levels of government participating with the private sector to ensure that level of comfort and confidence in investing in Canada. But let me go a bit more granular, Mr. Chairman, because there's a lot more benefits than just the obvious that we see on the surface. Yes, it's big dollars, $1.6 billion in Port Colborne, for example, with Asahi Kasai, 1,500 jobs, really strengthening the trades, the workforce. But let's take the next layer and the residual benefits that it applies to. We recognize that in Canada there is an urgent need for supply chain and logistics relationships. And with that, and in today's interconnected world, a resilient and adaptive supply chain is no longer a luxury, Mr. Chairman. It's a necessity. And unpredictable global disruptions and shifts in demand have highlighted the vulnerabilities of existing and somewhat out-of-date systems that sometimes government and even the private sector become content with and complacent. And with this new emerging market coming here to Canada, and Canada being the front door to this new emerging market, it gives a lot more confidence, investor confidence, that Canada is in the game, regardless of whether it's a sector with EVs or other sectors. We are leading by example when it comes to investing in Canada. And to safeguard economic growth, Mr. Chairman, and ensure timely delivery of essential goods within our supply chains, we're establishing those comprehensive relationships that prioritize the sustainability, innovation, and efficiency. And this is part of that. The EV sector is part of that. And once again, by leading by example as a country with our partner provinces, territories, municipalities, once again, it's showing Canada and strengthening Canada with respect to our international trade performance and the partners that are within that stronger international trade performance. Mr. Chairman, to meet current and future capacity needs, strategic investments must be made in these sectors, which leads me to my second point, my third point actually, and that's the investments in our supply chains with respect to the capacity needed to create the fluidity within those supply chains. So while government invests in these companies coming into the country, the residual benefits of those investments are the capacity, the infrastructure investments, water, sewer, roads, parks, sidewalks, recreation trails, policing, fire, public health, community services, and the list goes on. All those growth-related costs, because of that one investment, are now being looked after because of the investments coming out of the federal, provincial, municipal governments, and then therefore lends itself to other investments that are going to accrue over time. So let's not let that be lost upon us with respect to the technology and the workforce development that will also build and strengthen because of that one investment based on the vision of this country. And Mr. Chairman, by securing the funding for critical supply chain and logistics improvements through investments like this, in terms of this sector, the EV sector, we will reduce, for example, and this is my next point, the bottlenecks within our supply chains and those economic corridors. We'll optimize transportation networks. We'll better support industries dependent on timely and reliable delivery. That's all part of this. So we really, really have to ensure that we recognize what these investments are attaching to. So to have a motion like this come up just discourages the entire concept of economic development, and therefore, in no way will I be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Badaway. J'ai Jean-Denis Garon, Jeremy.
I have Jean-Denis Garon, Jeremy Patzer, Mr. Garon. Thank you, Chair. I don't have my colleagues' patience to explain the ecological green transition to the Conservatives. Everybody knows at the Bloc that I'm a very patient person, but I've run out of patience. Especially since, look, this motion seeks to try an entire industry. It could have been written to be productive, but it's written to be complacent. I'm very surprised. 2 weeks ago, our Conservative colleagues, member for Leeds, Grenville Thousand Islands, was ready to give the key to our information infrastructure to Elon Musk. Maybe he can call Musk and talk about electric cars. If he's their guru, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea. You know, you can't have a glass that's both half empty and half full. I mean, you could have it, but psychologically, Chair, we've got China. We've imposed tariffs on Chinese cars. 50% of new cars sold in China are electric. So this is a paradigm with this motion. It's implying that this market is collapsing. No, if he thinks that the earth is flat, he could write that in a motion too, and we'll discuss it. This market is increasing, and electric vehicles exist everywhere, in every industrialized country. Their use is growing in the United States, and what we're hearing here is a trial for the entire industry. I think listing these projects might not be the right way to proceed. Sure, Northvolt is of interest to us. I think if the Legislative Assembly wants to look at the portion of Northvolt that relates to Quebec, it can do so at the National Assembly. But Mr. Turnbull is saying if federal grants take a different form, fine. There's some very provincial issues, or national as far as we're concerned, that are for our legislatures to deal with, and I don't think this is the time or place to do this. If the Conservatives want to try the entire industry, they have to understand, firstly, that the transition is real. And you can't just decide for political reasons because our electors like seeing oil in their coffee cups in the morning. We can't just decide that when we've had a bad quarter in an industry, we condemn the whole industry. If you want to condemn the whole industry, you have to look at all of the projects in that industry, not just batteries, but also clean tech. And this industry is booming in Quebec. And here, our partners, our competitors, because whether or not they believe in climate change and global warming, that's up to them. But there are export markets and high added value markets to be developed. And we can have high-paying jobs and substantial productivity increases in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. They can't deny that reality, independent of what they may think about global warming. And even the proportion of Canadian vehicles in global warming. The market is real and it must be developed. So what they're doing is, if they're taking the S&P 500, they're taking the 500 leading companies in the U.S. and saying, let's look at the 10 that aren't having a good quarter, and let's discuss how bad they are to abolish the entire index. No one on earth would find this has any inkling of common sense. That's what dishonesty is. It's not the content of the motion. It's that they've decided to leave out of the motion. You can take any sector in the economy, anyone, and find some company that isn't doing well, that's having some venture capital issues and is having a bad quarter. So does that mean you shut down the whole industry? No, Chair. So look, I understand that the Conservatives are sensitive about this. I understand that there are grant programs and the government's way of proceeding is not their preferred avenue, may not be mine in some issues either, Chair. But to put an entire industry on trial over and over again when it's an industry of the future that Quebecers believe in, I just don't see how this kind of a motion could be supported by Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Garon. Mr. Patzer.
All right, thank you, Chair. Well, you know, I think part of what we can do here too is let's take a look at where these subsidies are going. We know Volkswagen got subsidies. We know that Stellantis got subsidies. And let's take a look at what's happening within those companies. Volkswagen over in Germany is going through a restructuring with $4.4 billion worth of capacity cuts. So while Volkswagen is cutting good-paying union jobs, not here in Canada, but around the world, this government is making sure that the executives are getting big handouts yet again. Stellantis, what's happening south of the borders? Again, we got to take a look around the world, see what the context is. The United Auto Workers are filing they're filing unfair labor practice charges against Stellantis because of their desire to move their vehicle production into Mexico and out of the United States, which again would impact good-paying union jobs. So when you start to look at what some of the companies within the industry are doing, and these companies are actually benefiting from Canadian subsidies, meanwhile they're doing all these things around the world that are having a negative impact on jobs and layoffs, while the corporate elites are getting paid big money. I think that is something that should be alarming for everybody around this table, regardless of which party they represent. So, yeah, I don't know. It just there's a few other worrying trends. You know, China, for example, everyone's talking about how there's these great EVs being made in China. Well, what else is China doing? Well, at one point they'd approved 214 gigawatts of new coal power generation to be able to stabilize their grid. Now they're not bringing that much online. They've lowered that number a little bit, but the fact remains that they're still, in one quarter alone, they had brought in 10 gigawatts of coal power to be able to fuel their industrialized complex that they're building over there. So, you know, I think we've got to take a look at the whole picture here when we talk about what's happening, and just looking at some of these other examples around the world. I think there's a very compelling case for this committee to take a look at what's happening with the EV industry, particularly here in Canada. And when you see the companies that we're subsidizing, you see what they are doing around the world in other parts of the world. That should be worrying for Canadian workers and Canadian jobs, particularly if we're going to try to build out any kind of industry, whether it's EV or not, in this country. So we should look at what some of these trends are, and I think that's important. We look at what's happening with these companies.
Merci, Monsieur Patzer. Monsieur Généreux.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Mr. Généreux. Thank you, Chair. Great show by our colleague, Mr. Garon, from the Bloc Québécois. He's lost patience. I'm starting to lose it, too. Because, you know, when a motion is tabled to essentially contest what's happening in an area, we never said that we were in disagreement with climate change. We never said that we disagreed with technological change. We never said we were against EVs. We never said we are against new development of a new industry in Canada or in Quebec. It's completely ridiculous to claim so about the Conservatives. What the motion essentially says, and history has taught us, as recently as in the fund that we're still studying, where we're looking at boards of directors and some organizations and how they're spending, where money was given to companies where there were direct conflicts of interest. We're talking about $50 billion here, minimum, that the government of Canada is going to be spending in future years in this area. And the cousin of the Bloc Québécois, the Parti Québécois, is asking legitimate questions right now about Northvolt in Quebec. So I don't see why in Ottawa we can't also ask questions which are completely legitimate. Why can't we ask experts in the government these questions? We want to know whether the way in which this money has begun to be spent and invested is the right way to do so. Is this legitimate? As for the industry, I've heard that it takes 20 years to develop mines to be able to provide plants with what they need here in Canada. And now we're saying 106% tax on Chinese cars. And eventually we're going to have to charge taxes on inputs, which will be used in batteries, which will be made in Canada or assembled in Canada. But those inputs will end up making batteries cost even more, so they'll be inaccessible to the population of Canada. So I think this is a very simple motion. What it says and what it seeks to accomplish is to validate or audit what's being done with the money being invested here in Canada. Quite clearly, the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc don't give a darn about how money is being spent here. And in 10 years, we're going to have to turn around and say, oh my gosh, was the money spent? Why were these decisions made? Why didn't anyone validate these decisions? We're going through this again with money that was spent, if we're talking about $1 billion and hundreds of millions of dollars in the Green Fund. And here we're going to have to ask ourselves again, or we oughtn't have to ask the question. We could spend the money, no problem, But what about validating? I think it's the simplest thing and the most logical thing to do for any government in power that wants to ensure that they validate what an industry or what the economy could lead to in terms of economic spin-offs. I see nothing in there that the Conservatives don't believe in climate change and that they don't want to invest, that they don't want to have any EVs, that we don't believe in the transition. That's ridiculous to say so. I'll stop there because I could say plenty more about it. But quite frankly, I think it's a simple motion, it's a concrete motion, it's a direct motion, and it's in our interest as members of Parliament. It's part of our jobs to ensure and validate such major investments and that they are done properly. And this should be verified as we move forward rather than waiting 10 years to say, oh my goodness, we ought to, we shoulda, coulda, would, whatever. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. I have Mr. Massé and then Mr. Garon.
Mr. Chair, I think the first thing is the timing of the motion is difficult to deal with. There's no doubt about that. I see it as a direct threat to the credit card study that I have. It requires a specific date that we have to break off, and it also shifts us into a different direction. It's probably going to be shopped around to other committees too, given the behavior of the Conservative Party in here, so we have to deal with that as well. It's just something that I think is important. As far as the Conservatives with regards to auto, I was here when Jim Flaherty said we don't pick winners or losers. And we had to fight like hell to get investment to save General Motors and to save Chrysler at that time. And that had done before. In fact, the Canadian government made money over it. The first time it actually came to support Chrysler during the economic recession of the 1980s, we actually had money on it. In fact, when we were done with the General Motors investment that we did, the government under Harper sold the shares short. And we lost money because of that. Had we held on to the shares, we would actually have made more money for that. So I've been long after an auto policy in this place since I've started here. And we've gotten a little bit closer because some of the incentives that we're talking about here today are actually tied to actually manufacturing the products, and it's not going to the companies without actually having products deliverables. And that has been a shift that's changed. I also remember programs that the Conservatives put in place, like the Eco Auto Fee. People probably don't remember that one too much, but that's $110 million that they provided to the auto industry. And get this, it was to lower, it was give incentive to cars to have greater duration of time for their mileage. And so what they did, and we warned them of this, and they didn't believe us, they decided they would allow the industry to do whatever it wanted with the car to kind of increase the mileage. So what happened was Toyota, with the Yaris, ended up getting around $96 million of $110 million because they took out the rear airbags to make the car to be able to go farther because it had less weight. So that was the Conservatives' auto policy at that time. They basically gave a direct subsidy to Toyota, who then later on went on to a number of different things that they didn't address, including the emissions issues, and also the Prius with regards to the policies around not even putting them accountable to the braking system, which was actually software all along, having to live through all the excuses that they provided and no follow-up from the government on it being like Canadian mats that were put in the cars being responsible for the deaths and crashes of people. And again, I want to note that I'm kind of surprised that we don't have an Ontario Conservative here, because I also see this as a part of their internal problems with regards to attack on Doug Ford and his government. So Doug Ford and his government is contributing to the Oakville plant $500 million. In the Stellantis plant, they're at $500 million. The General Motors plant, they're at $259 million. And to the Honda plant, they're into $131.6 million. And to the Umicore plant, this one doesn't have a horn on the end of it, I suppose. They're into money into that as well, too. And so that's the summary of the Ontario commitment. So I'm kind of surprised that we wouldn't have an Ontario MP from the Conservative Party raise this, because I know some have toured some of the battery plants that they've actually been criticizing. They've actually sometimes been at the announcements, but also, too, they went and toured over the summer. I was there when a Conservative member was touring a plant with me, which was good. And that's been helpful to kind of discuss some of the challenges that are here. So why there is an attack on Doug Ford, I don't know. I'll let the Conservatives sort that. We already know they have sore spots. And I can tell you I'm not happy with Doug Ford because, as Mr. Badaway would know, as I'm fighting hazardous material waste getting into my community. And so for me to come to the defense of Doug Ford in terms of their investments here is not what I would want to do, as I'm at the same time trying to stop hazardous material coming across in the Ambassador Bridge. In the province is trying to shirk that responsibility, and I'm trying to get the feds to deal with it, the province to deal with it. And so that tells you kind of where I'm at with this. With regards to, and this is what I am concerned, and Mr. Patzer did raise like an interesting thing that's taking place, the Stellantis plant. But here's what they're doing, though. They're actually contesting the agreements of the investment in Windsor, Ontario. And that becomes, if you look at the history, is because it was Bob White who broke away from the UAW. So we actually broke away. We were part of a United Auto Workers Alliance across North America, but because Canadian interests were always subverted, we broke away from that, and Bob White formed the CAW at that time. And the CAW is now Unifor. And so we have had to fight tooth and nail for these investments, including a product in Windsor, which is now being contested by the UAW, because they have their own agenda for American workers. We actually have Unifor for Canadian workers. And so when we start to open up these things here and having all the kinds of testimony in front of us here on that, that's going to get highly complicated as well, too. And we need to support our workers, not drag them under the undertow by accident, which is going to happen in this. And again, that's why we specifically, and if you're not familiar with Bob White, he's one of the biggest union representatives that Canada has ever had. And breaking away from an American union that was so powerful was very difficult to do. And it also came from the fact that we actually lost the Auto Pact, which I don't want to get into all here today, Mr. Chair. I don't think that's fair to kind of run down the Auto Pact. But the whole thing with the Auto Pact is it was a privileged trade agreement that was actually created that worked really well because we compromised on other things that we lost because we signed the free trade agreement. And I want to conclude by saying that the issue over Quebec in this, too, is important and not to be underestimated. We finally got Quebec back into being a major player in the future of automotive. That's huge. My father was an executive for Chrysler who worked under Yves Landry. And when we lost the Saint-Therese plant and we lost other plants across Quebec, it was a huge hit to manufacturing industrialization, not only in Quebec, but also Ontario. So getting Quebec back in the game on this is huge. So I would not want to compromise that right now because we have witnessed decade after decade of Quebec not having to get its share of where it really is very influential because of its automotive past and the aerospace issues that actually complement each other. So that's a huge issue for this. So for many different reasons, I can't support this motion at this time. I think I've outlined some of them right here. We could go on for more, but I won't do that. But if in the future we want to do something on auto, once we finish the business and agenda that we have, totally open to doing that. But hopefully it would be something that would be more sensitive than just trying to hit and run an attempt on certain different projects.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. Monsieur Garon.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. Mr. Garon. Thank you, Chair. Look, I think this merits a response. I am questioning the intention behind the motion. If you listen to what Mr. Généreux is saying, he's saying that we're just making a spectacle of things here. We're doing theatrics. Well, I agree, but we're not the only ones. Mr. Généreux is the chief validator. He wants to validate all kinds of things. This is a validating motion. It's all validating points. But if you read the motion, they want to review the government's strategy. That's quite the validation, isn't it? So how is it that here we have never validated the government strategies that distribute Canadian dollars to the petroleum and the oil and gas industry? Well, maybe at natural resources, but we're not, it's not the only thing that gets duplicated, you know? So I'm not at the National Resources Committee. So how is it that oil and gas subsidies have not been validated? He's saying, we just want to validate and make sure things are being done correctly. I'm quoting you. He said it 100 times. I am against any industrial subsidy in any form whatsoever. Well, Mr. Poilievre, that's quite a validation. If you want to know whether things are going well with industrial grants and government strategies, well, it's quite the show. There's an implication here that my implication was dishonest. And maybe it's colorful. We are who we are, after all. But it was certainly not dishonest. What about climate change, Chair? I will show enough decorum and class to not name names. I will not name names, Chair. But I do remember having walked along Parliament Hill with a Conservative who said that in his province, he said in English, of course, and they say that imagine there are people telling me the planet is warming up. You can ask Western Conservatives. Of course, there's the Quebec wing, we understand. But the Quebec wing of the Conservatives could almost have their Quebec caucus in a tiny spot. It's really the West that decides. Canada, the Western provinces decide and Quebec yells. It's not just being against the government strategy. The Conservative leader said that they're against any government strategy to provide industrial subsidies. When we're looking at what? The U.S. is not exactly communist. China is maybe something else. But look at European countries. They have this. So what is this all about saying we just simply want to validate? We have a right to question the intention behind a motion, and we have the right to question what isn't in a motion. They're saying Quebec wants to do this, and they're talking about the PQ. All of a sudden, they're interested in the PQ these days. I don't know what it is. In the last couple of weeks, they're suddenly so interested in the PQ. They must have a reason, but they're saying the PQ wants to study this. Maybe the parliamentary secretary could confirm something for us, but until now, Ottawa paid a total, tax included, of $0 to Northvolt because it's production subsidies. It's a Quebec-Ottawa agreement. I'm not telling you my personal position or the Bloc's position on the form of this, but one thing's for sure. Just because the National Assembly asks you to study something doesn't mean that here, when not 1 cent of federal money has been spent yet, the time that we should have spent protecting personal data and artificial intelligence to study this matter right now at the federal parliament. This logic is completely... look, how many times have we said in Quebec, if the Quebec Legislative Assembly is going to study health, does that mean that you have to get involved in Quebec's matters at the federal level? I repeat that this is not just for show. This is not just theatrics. The Conservatives' position is clear. The way the motion is drafted is not even subtle, Chair. And I don't see what circumstance there could be to make intelligent use of our time by doing this right now. And I would like to remind you that Bill 25 has been passed in Quebec, and there's certain connections in terms of personal information here, and the Quebec's National Assembly is concerned about this. Right now, we're totally stalled because we're going from motion to motion. We know what they're doing. They're going to say, "Oh, we'll be voted in who knows how many weeks." But the reality is right now, all of us are here being paid handsomely by the public with resources and witnesses and competent government officials who come here, and we're making a laughingstock of them and their schedules. We could actually be getting down to work. And here, it's not even the content of this motion that's important. It's the way it's using our time. So don't accuse me of theatrics. If I'm using a certain tone, and if I'm speaking in such a way, together with coffee, if I can this way help to wake you up, well, it's anything but theatrics. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gajon. Ms. Rempel-Garner.
And I actually think I need another coffee. This is a lot for Thursday morning at 8:15 with a half a cup in me. Okay, so if I heard my Bloc and NDP colleagues correctly, the issue perhaps is less with the content and more with the timing. So I propose an amendment to this motion So I guess it would be in the third paragraph, so the final paragraph of the motion, that the first sentence be changed to read, the committee therefore agree to conduct a study of not less than 4 meetings beginning in the first sitting week of, and then strike the words of November. So strike the words of November and replace it with, if I can read my own handwriting, in the first sitting week of January or after the credit card study is complete, whatever is earlier. So I propose that amendment, which I'm hoping my colleagues will support. Surprise, Rick. Because I think that might address some of Mr. Massey's concern. I am very keen to start the credit card study as well. Certainly contributed to the witness list, chair, just with a lot of people in my riding who I think echo some of the concerns that were outlined in the study. So I'm keen to get going on that. But I just want to look at the content of this motion and perhaps make an argument for it. So some of the Liberals have suggested that this motion, or the wording of this motion, is meant to suggest that there isn't a need for an EV industry, a vibrant EV industry in Canada. I think that having an EV industry in Canada is a very important thing. Certainly having lower reducing emitting cars is something I think many consumers are keen to do because we're all partners in finding ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but that do so while ensuring that the cost of living is kept low for Canadians. So there's nothing in the motion that suggests, as the Liberals have said, that somehow this suggests that we don't want an EV industry. It's actually the opposite. So colleagues, if we want to have an EV industry in Canada, and this government has put a lot of money behind this, a lot of tax dollars, right? I want to remind us all that we have a fiduciary responsibility as members of Parliament to ensure that tax dollars are being well spent. So if they're being dedicated towards one company or another company, and it's clear in the media that those companies are experiencing issues, then it behooves us to ask the question which my colleague Mr. Perkins is asking in here, which is to review the government's EV strategy. That's all this asks. It's ask: are we investing in the right spot? Or do the investments that the government has made, do they still make sense given that the news that's happened recently? Like colleagues, I'll direct your attention to an article from CBC News, so hardly a bastion of conservative thought. It was published on September the 1st, and it said Northvolt's EV battery plant in Quebec could be delayed up to 18 months. So the government's entire argument on the allocation of billions of dollars as part of their environmental narrative hinges on plants like these. And now we've heard that this plant could be delayed. So it behooves us to ask the question that's in this motion is, does this impact the government's EV strategy? What I've heard here today, colleagues, and I understand that there's politics behind here. I understand that some of my Liberal colleagues might not want to ask this question. But if people actually care about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by producing electric vehicles, then we should be asking if there's a story in Canada's major broadcaster that this plant might not come to fruition, maybe we should ask if there needs to be adjustments in the strategy to ensure that the objectives that the government's tried to sell us on actually come to fruition. So there's one more thing that I just, because there's been a lot of talk about Quebec politics and Ontario politics and who's here and who's not here. Just a couple of comments, folks. Yes, I'm an Alberta MP, but I understand what it means to pull emitting cars off the road to reach greenhouse gas emissions targets. So I have been such a big advocate for the boondoggle that has been the Green Line in Calgary that should have pulled 50,000 cars off the road by now. okay? So, like, just because I'm from Alberta doesn't mean that I can't have, you know, something to add on asking whether or not the strategy is still working. So just want to say that. Second of all, like, when we're also talking, like, we have to be careful about talking about what regions are represented and who's not represented. I'm literally the only woman on this committee. So, you know, let's just park some of that things for a minute, okay? On the topic of Quebec politics, like, if we want to talk about this, this is now becoming a political issue. I think he's, and I asked for forgiveness from my colleagues from Quebec, but there was a Liberal MNA, Frédéric Beauchemin. I think he's a Liberal MNA, and he's criticizing the government, the Legault government, for putting all its eggs in one basket. Like, so now we're descending into territory where there are billions of dollars at stake, potentially laudable objectives about producing electric vehicles, and we don't have a clear line of sight on what the government is going to do, if anything, to correct course. Maybe they don't want to correct course. Maybe there's a reason for that. Some of my colleagues have made passionate arguments that there's no need to correct course. But I think we should actually, it would behoove us to spend a couple of meetings, given that there are billions of dollars on the line here, to have maybe some of these executives or the government officials come and say, you know what, even though we hear news that this plant is going to be delayed by 18 months and that the parent company has had a massive problem in its home company, it's still good. Here's why. The government has not done that, right? The other examples that my colleague, Mr. Perkins, has raised in this motion are equally as concerning. What the government is asking us to do, colleagues, is to continue to allocate billions of dollars to companies and plants that are not on the track that the government announced. So it is our responsibility to say, how is the plan progressing given these significant changes? So look, I think that the amendment, I'm looking in good faith to my colleagues. I want the credit card study to happen. I want to talk about electric vehicles, and I want to see what the government is doing to make sure that despite these reports, our country is still on track to make some of the targets, given the opportunity cost of the billions of dollars. Like, I mean, guys, like, the billions of dollars that are being directed here at a time when there needs to be legitimate climate action in Canada. If it's not going to achieve the results that the government is saying in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, then we need, and job growth, then we need to have a rethink, right? In terms of what the strategy is and how we're going to get there, okay? So that's why I support this motion. I disagree with the characterization that this is somehow irresponsible or saying, like, we need to have smart solutions to address climate change. But if the government is putting billions of dollars into projects that are not going to come to fruition, like, there needs to be a rethink, right? For all of those reasons. So I hope you'll support this amendment. It is the mandate of this committee to review exact strategies like this. So I hope you will support this and that we can move on doing our jobs. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Turnbull.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull.
So thank you, Chair. Based on the conversation that we've had on this particular motion, I don't have a lot of hope for the Conservatives salvaging this right now. That's the feeling that I'm getting from the other colleagues around the table. I think we've all spoken passionately to where we stand on this. It's clear that the framing of this is the problem, right? I think there's some underlying assumptions in the whole frame of the motion, which fundamentally I disagree with. So, Ms. Rempel-Garner, changing the slight timeline to me doesn't fix the motion. And I just think that it would be easier for us to revisit this when we finish C27. I think, you know, if you and the Conservatives have questions for the minister on the changes to some of these, you're going to have him for 2 hours sometime in the next 2 weeks, which we've committed to. Sorry?
The minister is confirmed for 1 hour.
Excuse me, 1 hour. So you'll have, your time with the minister to ask those questions, which I think, we brought in the scope of that motion to include and ensure that those questions were, like anything to do with his priorities and mandate was basically how we left it. So I think that's good news. Like, let's I say we dispense with this motion by voting on it, and then we can revisit later down the road when we're finished C27. We can say, okay, what does this committee have as priorities? We can all put our thoughts into what our next priorities are, and we can have a mutually beneficial discussion on reaching some consensus around what else we would like to study. And the EV industry is something I'm interested in. Like, I would love to, think about how we might do something later down the road on that, but I don't think, again, now is the time. And I think it's really the framing of this particular motion that I take issue with, and I think I've heard very clearly from other colleagues that they see it in somewhat similar light, and actually they made better arguments than I made, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. But before we deal with the motion, we have to dispose of the amendment that was presented by MP Rempel-Garner. So we're still on the amendment right now. We've all heard it, and I have MP Rempel-Garner.
I just want to put on the record, because my colleague has talked about taking issue with the framing of the motion. So I want to go through it very clearly, because I don't agree with that assertion that there's a problem with the motion literally is fact, 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 fact. So that the government has invested more than $50 billion towards creation of an EV battery plant. Fact. And that has mandated all automobile sales in Canada by zero emitting by 2040. Fact. Right? And given that Northvolt's $7 billion EV plant in Montreal, Quebec, has delayed construction for upwards of a year, unless they're saying that CBC News has put out fake news, that is a fact. This is a fact. It's a fact. It has been reported.
Point of
18
order,
months.
Chair.
Right?
Just 1 second, MP Rempel-Garner.
So,
a point of order.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not us that ever says CBC puts out fake news. It's the Conservatives that say that they're going to defund the CBC and then use their headlines as evidence to make their arguments in committee.
Mr. Turnbull, I agree that's not a point of order. So
Thank you. So, but it is fact that, like, the CBC has reported that this plant, the Northvolt plant, will be delayed by up to 18 months. The point 2 says Unicor's $7.2 billion EV component plant in Kingston has halted construction despite receiving billions of dollars worth of taxpayer subsidy, also a fact. Ford's $1.8 billion EV expansion in Oakville, Ontario has been scrapped and retooled to make gasoline pickups, despite receiving $890 million worth of, or $590 million worth of taxpayer subsidies. Also fact. These points, like the framing is, these are a statement of fact. There's nothing torqued in here. It is a statement of fact that we should all be concerned with. And then in terms of the operative clause on what this is asking to do is a 4-meeting study to review the government's EV strategy. Given that fact, the significant amount of taxpayer support amid a global slowdown in EV production and sales, there has been a global slowdown in EV production and sales. It's not just Canada. That is a fact. And then the committee agreed to hear from witnesses submitted by members of the committee. So my colleague suggests that an hour with the minister when we have a litany of other issues is sufficient to address this issue is not correct, number one. It's just not. Like, that's a preposterous assertion. Like, it's preposterous. The second thing is that we actually need to hear from some of the executives, and not just executives. I would like, if this passed, I would put on the witness list hopefully someone with a background in emissions modeling, looking at what the delay in these plants mean for the government's forward projections on emissions reductions, given the level of subsidies that they're directly committed to this, right? How have these changes changed the government's forward modeling on greenhouse gas emissions? Because Canadians are being asked to pay a lot, and if we're not getting that reduction, certainly not getting the jobs in the period of time that they said, then what is the government doing to, reverse course? Look, my colleague opposite has brought up the concept of politics a lot here. I think if I was going to make an assertion on why the Liberals don't want to do this, is that the Minister of Industry is setting up for a leadership bid. That is public knowledge. And I think that his hallmark project, knowing that there's arguably some issues with it, might come under public scrutiny, would be problematic for people who might be seeking his favor in a leadership race. So if we're going to, ascribe motive, that's my, gut feeling here. I do not understand why anybody on this committee who cares about job creation in the auto sector, good, wise stewardship of tax dollars, and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions wouldn't agree to a forward-moved study. The operative clause here on the purpose of the study is to review the government's EV strategy. There's no motive that's given. It's just saying, like, look, there's been massive changes. We should be reviewing the government's EV strategy. And guys, like, you guys all know that there are problems here. There's structural problems with these deals now. And the wheels are going to come off the bus of these deals. And at that point in time, we are going to look back to these meetings and the arguments that have been made here, where we are having members of the House of Commons saying, nah, we shouldn't look at that. We shouldn't look at billions of dollars of subsidies. I know I will be. There's a lot of things that were here said today that I'm like taking furious notes. Like, yep, they said that. Okay, not a problem. Turnbull 910 on the thing, right? Because like it's preposterous. So, and also like the argument on, like, I hear in the House of Commons all the time, like rich corporate executives. You guys are literally letting rich corporate executives off the hook. When a company like Northvolt announces that they're going to delay a plant by 18 months after basically shuttering their operations in their parent company, we're like, oh, no, it's okay, it's fine, we don't need to scrutinize this. Even at, like, in January, like, ugh. That is, it's a sad state of affairs. So anyway, I am now proposing the amendment on the table seeks to address my colleagues on the opposition side on timing, which are reasonable. I also want to get to the credit card study too. So I hope that you will accept the sub-amendment, and I hope my colleagues will think carefully about not supporting this. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, MP Rempel-Garner, for reminding everyone that we are dealing with the amendment. I've been very generous in my interpretation of the amendment, but we should be addressing the amendment right now before we come back to the motion. Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Both the amendment and the motion, again, as I said earlier, really discourages the intent of what our government and, quite frankly, all of us, regardless of what party we belong to, up here in Ottawa, are trying to nurture as well as strengthen when it comes to our economic opportunities over and above what we've been reliant upon in the past. Let's face it, and again, I go back to what I said earlier about my province in Ontario. There's a reason why our production and our performance has been at the level it's at, and that's because of all levels of government working together to ensure that this growth continues, especially, as I said earlier, Canada being the front door to new and emerging markets. Again, there's a reason for that, and it is a matter of all of us working together to that end. But I just want to make a final point, and I want to really drill down on this, because, coming from my former life in municipal government and now here in federal government, how important it is that we participate in the investments needed within our supply chains, our economic corridors with respect to capacity. And that's the residual benefit of investments like this. It's not just going to the company. It's also going to the investments needed to really strengthen the capacity, creating fluidity within our economic corridors. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it at that. And what I would suggest now is that we simply go to a vote so we can move on with our business of the day.
A suggestion I like, and I see no other speakers on the list. So on the amendment, I would put it to a vote, Madame Lagreffière.
Mr. Turnbull.
Oppose.
Mr. Aria.
Oppose.
Mr. Badaway.
No.
Mr. Gahir?
No.
Mr. Van Bynen?
No.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Monsieur Généreux?
Certainement.
Mr. Patzer?
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Gardner?
Yes.
Monsieur Garon?
No.
Mr. Massey?
No.
Alors, l'amendement est défait, ce qui nous...
The amendment is defeated, which brings us back to the motion moved by Mr. Perkins. Does anyone else wish to address the motion? I don't see any. So, no, Mr. Perkins?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I will put it to a vote. Madame la Greffière.
Mr. Turnbull?
Oppose.
Mr. Arias?
No.
Mr. Badaway? Mr. Gahir?
Nope.
Mr. Van Bynen?
No.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Monsieur Généreux?
Wait.
Mr. Patzer?
Yes.
Ms. Rempel-Garner?
Yes.
Monsieur Garon?
No.
Mr. Massey?
No.
Thank you very much. So the motion is defeated. Mr. Perkins.
Chair, I know there are people watching right now, probably tuning in to say what's going on with C-27 when we're talking about this, and there's been a bit of a, perhaps, I'll say, confused characterization of the status of C-27 by Minister Champagne in comments in Montreal yesterday, where he said the three opposition parties are filibustering C-27. I think perhaps MP Turnbull or somebody should update the minister on the status. We have had 10 meetings so far on clause by clause. In the last 5 meetings, the Liberals have filibustered one amendment. So if the minister wants to get up to speed about the status of his bill, he waited a year between introduction and second reading before we even got to second reading in the House. So he delayed it a year, or at least his House leader did. And then the Liberals have been filibustering for the last 5 meetings. And it was actually the Liberals that agreed and suggested we delay C-27 to proceed with the credit card study while they sort out their problems with their broken bill and the bad elements of it, in particular, the creation of a new Liberal bureaucracy, the tribunal. And so, Mr. Chair, in regard to that, I think the committee needs to send a message directly to the minister that we don't appreciate his either lack of knowledge of what's going on in this meeting or the misrepresentation he is doing to the media about our work on C-27. So with that, I will move the following motion that with regard to the committee's ongoing study of Bill C-27, and given Minister Champagne has accused opposition parties of slowing down consideration of the bill, but given that, one, the minister delayed consideration of the bill for a year by leaving it on the order paper, preventing its consideration in second reading, and given, two, Liberal members of the Industry Committee have continuously filibustered consideration for the last 5 of our 10 clause-by-clause meetings to prevent passage of amendments recommended by the Privacy Commissioner, that the committee therefore express its disagreement with Minister Champagne's comments in Montreal yesterday and orders the clerk of the committee to draft a letter to the minister requesting that his members stop their filibuster on C-27.
Oui, merci. Donc, ça...
Thank you. So this is retabling the motion. Has it been sent to our members?
Sent to members, but and technically no notice was given, but we are on technically on C-27 this meeting, so I will allow it. J'ai Monsieur Garon et Monsieur...
I have Mr. Garon and Mr. Massey. Mr. Garon. Thank you to colleagues for tabling the motion. Of course, we were waiting for it in both official languages so as to be able to see the details of it. It was read quickly. Now listen. It's becoming difficult to know what C-27 is about. It's been... things are being blocked on all sides, from all sides, for all kinds of reasons. I was listening to Mr. Perkins' motion. there are only facts in the motion. Now, it's true that the bill was insufficient. There have been a lot of government amendments. Yes, it complicated things. Yes, the bill is from 2022 and it's taken time, et cetera, et cetera. But, and actually, we have to work in a spirit of collaboration. I don't know how much more time this Parliament has, but from the elements that we see in C-27, the first part about personal information is important. I am still hopeful that we'll be able to find some way to move on it. Now, we're at CPC 9. There was the whole issue of the tribunal. We've talked about this in the committee. There's no secret to it. We said that we were not much in agreement with creating a new tribunal. We were ready to find alternate solutions. And the Conservatives, it's a good amendment. They did what they could. We understand that on the Liberal end, they don't want to give all the powers to the Commissioner. But there's a way of moving forward without the tribunal. It seemed to me, it seemed possible to me that there could be that there's been some rigidity from the department or the minister that's making the parliamentary secretary's job impossible, because if the parliamentary secretary is being asked to do something where the three oppositions in a minority parliament are not in agreement with, we're in a situation where it's impossible to deliver. Now, I understand that there's filibustering on all sides, and Chair, even if the topic was EVs, what we're dealing with today is a filibuster on C-27. We sent the witnesses back home. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. CBC is reporting hockey scores. Should we make a study of hockey scores? I mean, this is the level of argument we've been reduced to. The Conservatives seem to agree with this. I just want to confirm that this is not a motion here. I'm not moving a motion here. Yes, there are facts. I think a minister must have some reserve regarding the first part, regarding the way forward. Everybody's talking to each other and everyone's being constructive. My colleague, Mr. Perkins, and his acolytes, the parliamentary secretary, Mr. Massey. And it's true that I believe that if the minister wants to make our job easier, he has to be more reserved in public. It's everybody and nobody's fault. Let's look at the text of the motion. Can we adopt it? If the minister is listening, I would ask him to remain calm, to trust his committee, to trust his parliamentary secretary, to trust the conversation so that we can find this way forward. Thank you very much. Mr. Massey.
Yeah, I haven't seen the media reports yet, but I believe what Mr. Perkins has expressed is possible true because it's been out there before. And I see this as another part of an unfortunate decline to Parliament here. Here you have a committee that's come back, that struggled through a couple controversial elements been proposed. We have basically a toxic House of Commons that I haven't seen in my 20-plus years here. We have a toxic environment outside the House of Commons as well, too, that I haven't seen in my 20-plus years here. And then now we have potentially, as we're trying to broker a potential solution for an issue that has seized the committee, and you can use the word filibuster or you can use it being extensive questioning of repeated measures, whatever you wanted to do, but it's been true that the government side has been delaying in terms of what they wanted to do here. And then we came back. I thought it was helpful, though, to have the government say, we are willing to put something aside, do a study, and we'll come back with something that maybe we'll be able to deal with. I thought that was actually one of the more positive things I've seen in a lot of times here. So I just think that, I don't know whether this is going to pass or we'll get to today or not. I mean, I'd still like to see the media reports because I hate to respond without seeing the media report myself. So that's my only concern in this, is because I haven't seen it. I have no reason to not believe Mr. Perkins on this, and I'm not saying that, but I want to make sure that the media reported it correctly, is more to the question that I would have. But he has been fast and loose on this before, and I've seen in the House of Commons respond blaming others for kind of where we're at. And so perhaps this might be another moment that will self-correct where we need to get. If we're actually going to save all the work that we've done on the privacy element of this bill, I'm not sure whether we can legitimately get to the AI stuff, and I've told that over a number of different times. Even if we wanted to get to that second part of the bill, it's probably logistically not even possible if the Parliament went its full length to get through the Senate, given what the Senate's going to do with this bill. But the privacy elements and all the work that we've done and all the money that we've spent and all the different things we've gone through has legitimate life and has legitimate value for Canadian citizens. And whatever happens after this Parliament probably will be a benefit for whatever government comes into place or whatever opposition also comes into place, because they're good measures that if we all agree on, we're going to at least leave something that the next Parliament, whenever it comes, whoever they are, is not going to have to deal with and get to other issues that are important to Canadians. So I'm not sure I want to vote on this today. I'm struggling with that in terms of making sure that the media report, because I've seen in the past that there's media reports that have been said about something that don't always reflect what has been conveyed in that. But I actually appreciate this being raised in the sense that, I mean, hopefully this ends the nonsense and we can get to a genuine conclusion to the components that we really think that there's some genuine agreement on with regards to the Privacy Commissioner and the tribunal, which is really the major blocking point. I think there's a few other things, but it's more kind of coming to grips with those. So I'll leave it at there, and it's just disappointing to me because in here, when you think you actually have something done, you know, we have another scuttling of the committee in some respects to where we really could be going.
So, Mr. Massey, you're not moving to adjourn debate, right? No?
No, I don't want to do that to my colleagues, but I prefer not to deal with this today until I see the report. But I'm not sure where my colleagues are. I mean, I personally don't like to shut down debate unless I have to, but I appreciate it bringing back, and I'm not, again, I haven't seen the report. I haven't seen Mr. Perkins' motion. It's not his fault. He's able to do that, and so I haven't seen all those things. So those are the challenges I have in front of me at the moment with regards to it. So I don't want to adjourn debate because I think there's other colleagues that are on the list, and I hate to shut down debate without consensus for others.
Okay, I'm not sure about the order because sometimes I don't look to my right enough, but because I have MP Turnbull, Mr. Garon, Madame Rempel-Garner, but I'm not sure what the order is, but can we go like this? Yeah, the motion has been sent around. MP Turnbull.
Chair, maybe just to say briefly, you know, I think I've tried to operate in good faith in relation to C-27. We've worked through methodically quite a number of debates, and I think that was productive. And I actually believe that the bill was strengthened through our work together on many components as we moved up to the tribunal. And certainly we reached an impasse, but by no means would I consider my interactions with officials on committee and the deep, I think, debate and questions that we were asking them, and the clarification that they provided to us, and the differing perspectives that we had on the tribunal. I take issue with that being called a filibuster. It was not a filibuster. It was me asking officials and you, the Conservatives, and all other members of this committee asking the officials for clarity. And yes, we disagree, and we had some vigorous debate. But by no means was that ever, so again, I take issue with, you know, that being characterized as a filibuster. So I want to put that out there. The other thing is, I think the minister is saying publicly, he's advocating for us to continue our work on C-27. We've you know, recently said, okay, let's take a pause. We're at an impasse on the tribunal. Let's take a pause. Let's do another study in the interim, and let's have productive negotiations and conversations behind the scenes and try to work out our differences and find a path forward on C-27. We all agree that this piece of legislation is paramount to Canada's interests. It's in the public interest for us to have new reformed legislation on privacy and artificial intelligence. I mean, so I think what we should do, like, I don't think, you know, for me that this is productive for the committee to be writing a letter of this kind. Just doesn't seem to me to be helpful at all in terms of moving us forward. I'm looking to help us move forward and collaborate with all parties to try and work out a path forward on C-27. So that's where I stand. I really think that this is something that we should take up in a future meeting if members choose to do so. So I will move to adjourn debate on this.
Okay, Mr. Turnbull has moved to adjourn debate, and it's a dilatory motion, so it calls for a vote right away. I will ask for the vote. Madame la Greffière.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yay.
Mr. Aria,
Yes.
Mr. Badaway,
Yes.
Mr. Gahir. Yes. Mr. Van Bynen. Yes. Mr. Perkins,
No.
Mr. General,
No.
Mr. Patzer,
No.
Ms. Rempel-Garner,
No.
Monsieur Garon,
No.
Mr. Massey.
No.
Okay, so the motion is defeated, which takes us back to our list, and I have, I'll go to Madame Rempel-Garner because you haven't spoken yet, and then Monsieur Garon.
Just to address my colleague, Mr. Massey's concern, which is reasonable, I'll direct the committee's attention to an article in La Presse, which was published yesterday, and it's a bill specific. It's an article specific on this issue, and with great apologies to my colleagues from Quebec, I won't make you listen to my anglicized French. Thanks, Dad. So I'll read it as best I can, translate it in English. I deplore the fact that the opposition parties for over a year have done everything possible to slow the legislative process. But now I think we have to put partisanship aside and think about the interests of our innovators, our businesses, and our citizens, said François-Philippe Champagne in a press scrum on the sidelines of an event at the Montreal Council on Foreign Relations on Wednesday afternoon. So just to alleviate my colleague's concern, this is something that is now reported by one of the biggest media outlets in Quebec, and I mean, we have the parliamentary secretary anytime we raise a motion saying that, oh well, colleagues can just use their time when the minister comes for an hour to address these concerns, and then he's out there sort of casting aspersions on the work that's happening in this committee. I don't think that when he says, he's quoted as saying, now we have to put partisanship aside. Well, he shouldn't have taken a partisan dig at the work of this committee if he wanted it to be productive. So I think that was unfortunate, and I support my colleague's motion. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Garon.
Évidemment, Monsieur le Président.
Clearly, I didn't vote against adjournment because I was having such a good time. But I voted against it because if we adjourn now, we're just going to start again next time. It's going to come back. We're not going to finish with it. It's a bit ironic to say, but I don't think we have better use of time for the next 15 minutes. But the risk we're running here is, since each person has blocked things at one point or another, me as well, voluntarily or involuntarily, directly or indirectly, will end up voting on amendments and sub-amendments to a motion, and then we'll be talking about whose fault it is. Is it the Conservatives or whatever? Well, I think the source of the problem, to my mind, in this matter, and I would like to thank my colleague, Ms. Rempel-Garner, for reading this. I believe what she said. The source is the fact that the minister has publicly gotten involved in the committee's business, and it was not consistent with the conversations that we were having here amongst colleagues. So I spoke to Mr. Perkins informally, rather than passing this motion and then going from amendment to sub-amendment and wasting another 2 hours on the matter. I would suggest that we drop this and ask the clerk to write a letter to the minister asking the minister to be more cautious in his public communications regarding this committee's work.
Je pense que ça peut-être plus approprié si la lettre venait de moi comme président du comité que de la greffière.
Sans vouloir vous
mais-
heurter, monsieur.
Then it came from me as chair of the committee rather than from the clerk? Of course, I meant the chair. 100%. It's not really amendment to the motion. It's a suggestion. I'm not sure whether Mr. Perkins...
Motion
And obviously-
with unanimous consent. Do I have consent from the Liberals? Yes. Okay, so, and I'll draft a letter and send it shortly, probably by tomorrow. Madam Rempel-Garner.
It is, thank you, Chair. Just so that it's clear that, we are referencing fact, could the letter also include a reference to the article in La Presse as well?
That's fair, yeah. That's fair. Okay, wow. Well, merci, Monsieur Garon, pour votre contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Caron, for your constructive contribution to get us out of this impasse. And unless there are any other motions, I'm looking at Mr. Perkins out of the corner of my eye. If there are no further motions, I think that we have finished on time and on budget, so the meeting stands adjourned.